Welcome to Retail's Most Wanted, the podcast that examines the latest issues related to organized retail crime and how retailers and policymakers are fighting back against today's organized crime syndicates. Our guest today, Mahmoud Abuwasel. He's a Harvard-trained international disputes lawyer who has litigated cryptocurrency fraud and enforcement cases across borders. As organized retail crime moves from smash and grab to more sophisticated financial networks, he studies where crypto gives criminals an advantage and where the legal system is finally catching up. It's a great conversation. It's coming up right after this word from our sponsor. Retail's Most Wanted is brought to you in partnership with LVT, securing physical environments through intelligent automation. Learn more at lvt.com. That's lvt.com. Okay, Mahmoud, we'll just jump right in. I want to first welcome to Retail's Most Wanted. I really appreciate you being with us. And I want to just sort of jump right in. Retail crime has traditionally been physical. It's been sort of smash and grab, cargo theft, fencing, stolen goods. Where does cryptocurrency enter the ecosystem when we're talking about organized retail crime?
The mainstream financial press covers organized retail crime. They inevitably focus on the visual spectacle, right? The laptop and the mobile class loves a viral video, shattered glass, the masked flash mobs, the chaotic look of high-end cosmetics, of power tools, and so on. So it makes for compelling clickbait. But from a macro systems perspective, that is a distraction. The smash and grab is the inventory acquisition, and the issue is the transnational business model, right? And so what we think about when we think about retail smash and grab and so on is that is the low margin, high risk portion of the enterprise, but that portion is what's typically outsourced to local operators from larger organizations. And that is, I think, the theme of this conversation, where crypto has exponentially increased that transnational modus operandi of retail crime. So where cryptocurrency enters the equation is, at the very top of a syndicate's organizational chart, functioning as the ultimate financial bypass mechanism. Now, historically, the limiting factor for organized theft has been not stealing the physical goods. It was the friction of fencing these goods and then repatriating profits to wherever they end up. Now, if a syndicate stole a truckload of merchandise, let's say 20 years ago or so, or a decade ago, they would have to deal with inherent logistical nightmares of moving pallets of physical fiat cash, and that was inherently cumbersome. But today, these syndicates operate with the sophistication of a Fortune 500 e-commerce giant. Right? They aggregate the stolen goods, they warehouse them, they liquidate them online to either knowing or unknowing retail buyers. But once those goods are converted into legitimate fiat currency, the organization, the syndicate or cartel or whatever organized crime is behind this would face the structural bottleneck, right? And that would be the traditional banking system. And that was due to the fiat regime and the heavily fortified anti-money laundering laws and checkpoints and so on. So you can't wire millions of dollars in unverified amounts from the US to Eastern Europe and so on. Now, this is where cryptocurrency bridges this regulatory gap, right? The illicit fiat is funneled through stable coins like Tether or Bitcoin, and instantly shedding its geographical limitations. With a few keystrokes, millions in purchasing power are transferred across borders, entirely bypassing legacy banking panopticons. Furthermore, crypto is used as seed capital to finance the operations themselves. So with the viral smash and grab videos we're talking about, purchasing the tools for those activities, the GPS jammers, the dark web insider credentials, the fake shipping manifests. So while the theft remains deeply physical, the capital formation is also becoming entirely digital and relying on cryptocurrency to an extent. So crypto has become the mechanism that allows localized lawlessness to be financialized on a global scale. So we're transforming historically street level theft into a fictionless multinational enterprise.
So the cryptocurrency is, in a way, then sort of a payment tool for organized retail crime that enables the networks to scale faster and operate more globally than before. Are the criminal networks increasingly confident then that crypto gives them an edge over law enforcement? And is that confidence justified?
Well, I think that's a great. I think there's a pervasive and frankly predictable delusion operating within the criminal underclass, and that is a profound misunderstanding of the technology that they rely on. And maybe we generalize, but we see some issues that reflect that misunderstanding. And I think these networks suffer from the same Dunning-Kruger effect that plagued retail crypto speculators during the great manias of the past. They bought wholesale into the foundational marketing myth of the early cyberpunk movement, the illusion of absolute anonymity. And they look at a digital wallet address, see a string of random alphanumeric characters rather than a proper legal name, and mistakenly believe they have achieved total financial invisibility. So they utilize coin mixers, cross-chain bridges, algorithmic privacy tokens, and their confidence walls. And these are some of the tools. Don't get too nuanced, but these are some of the tools that either retail crime, bad actors, or others use in lawless crypto activity. So there's a sense of this arrogance and outsmarting the state and central planners. With that said, to answer your question directly, the confidence is not justified. It would be a miscalculation that is actively setting the stage for a spectacular harvest of federal indictments in due course. So we see blockchains are by design the most perfectly preserved, immutable surveillance apparatus that's been constructed. Right? When a cartel, a retail organized crime player launders physical cash, the trail naturally degrades. When the cash exchanges hands, the memories fade, the paper ledgers can be shredded. But when you execute a transaction on a public blockchain, you are permanently engraving your criminal conspiracy into an unalterable distributed ledger for the rest of time. And so you're doing the prosecution's bookkeeping for them, right? And you're happily paying network transaction fees for that privilege. So law enforcement agencies, armed with bleeding edge blockchain analytics, treat that ledger as a permanent map. And I should mention, law enforcement agencies have in recent years also been working with private sector entities as well. So it's not just the law enforcement itself, their capacities, but also the capacity of the private sector that support the prosecutorial authorities. So criminals might have a temporary advantage, but the ledger does not forget.
That would seem like a really big risk to me for an organized crime syndicate to have sort of that, like you're saying, a permanent ledger of their finances. Because if you find one of these, you find a little piece of the thread, it would seem like a real advantage for investigators to be able to follow that money back and say, if we know this is a bad actor, really every one of these other blockchain transactions that they've had, they should be able to follow that back. Is that accurate to think that way, that they're taking a big risk by you? Like, it might have tremendous advantages for them, but it also presents a really big risk.
Well, I think we'll get to this at some point in our conversation, but the trade-off is the lack of jurisdictional nexus in comparison to cash, right? So in the blockchain, money doesn't, or the value doesn't necessarily transfer. What happens is when it goes from one point to another point, it's exhausted from here and created here, right? And so if you're transferring, let's say, a Bitcoin from France to Hong Kong, it doesn't necessarily move from France to Hong Kong. It disappears in France and appears in Hong Kong, and that jurisdictional nuance is what organized retail crime seems to be betting on more and more as they engage or they finance local operations from abroad using crypto and then receiving the payback in crypto. And so, yes, there are other risks that manifest, as you mentioned. You start getting a sort of a spider's web of activity linked to that crypto, and that is a risk that's there. But there are also some benefits along the way. Well, I wouldn't say benefits, but advantages that organized retail crime may think would be beneficial for them.
So where does law enforcement, or where does enforcement break down most often? Technology, jurisdiction, the courts? Where do you see sort of the most obvious or glaring weak link in that chain?
Well, all three. But if I would rank them, I would say the courts, but not so much the activity of the courts themselves, but the engagement of courts in different jurisdictions, right? So, look, the technology is great, right? The technology is advanced enough, is sophisticated enough to track down activity from the get-go. And there are a lot of smart people, a lot of smart companies, chain analysis, and so on. So technology is great. Law enforcement in the U.S., at least over the past couple of years, have established specialized units for crypto crime, and they work with the private sector often. The problems with the court, but not the courts themselves, not the structure or the judges. It's the legal ecosystem, and the problems arise when you have a crime committed in one locality, and the prosecutorial authorities in that locality need to find a particular event in Southeast Asia, or in Central Africa, or Latin America, or Eastern Europe, and there is no established reciprocal way for the authorities in the U.S. or that jurisdiction to work with each other, right? There are some issues like tax evasion where there are international frameworks in place, but for crypto crime and so on, that's not there, and so you may have a court order coming out from the States related to a particular crypto transaction, like a decentralized exchange, ordering them to hold on to a particular wallet, seize that wallet, freeze it, whatever the case may be, and taking that judgment to that other jurisdiction takes time. There are complications, and what this does, it gives the bad actors time to move those funds illicitly or hide them further on in other jurisdictions. And so there is a lack of international framework cooperation systems, and that's the most difficult part. So stemming from the courts, but not necessarily the courts themselves.
How vulnerable are large retailers and supply chains to crypto-based ransom or extortion demands?
For retailers, what's happened over the years is they've established the whole economy or their economy on, in most cases, just-in-time systems, right? And this requires a high level of technological integration. And within that technological integration, also logistics, to the simple point of HVAC capabilities and different trucking assets, right? So the technological integration is live and accessible, and from there you can start seeing the vulnerabilities that organized retail crime can utilize through the crypto and the blockchain technologies and ransomware. And I think if you've seen, there was a viral piece that was viral last weekend by Semprini Research. Sort of look at 2028 and the implementation of AI by then as a sort of hindsight piece. And one of the exponential market elements that we're going to see in the next year or two is autonomous agents, right? Autonomous AI agents, and these autonomous AI agents will, by virtue of their looking for optimal use, will utilize cryptocurrency transactions and so on. And so, organized retail crime would deploy not just the technology, but also autonomous AI agents to exploit these systems and request ransomware or this, set up a ransomware situation either by stealing data or by threatening to exploit a particular significant item in that technological chain.
So I'm wondering then, where is the legal system catching up, and where are organized crime groups still exploiting gaps?
I think the legal system has caught up well. Over time, well, law enforcement, we said, have developed specialized units, work with the private sector, and so on. And there's a lot of internal knowledge development for personnel to stay abreast of these issues. The courts have become more and more pragmatic. So the courts no longer hinder issuing a warrant or issuing a judgment until they identify what is blockchain or what is crypto. I think if you and I were brought to a boardroom to advise central planners, retail executives, and policymakers, I think the advice would be brutally simple. I think you would fundamentally alter your defensive architecture because organized retail crime is highly agile and the technology gives them that ability. But the corporate cybersecurity teams and the retailers hold the digital fingerprints of IP addresses and so on. Their loss prevention teams know where the physical goods are. And the centralized exchanges can see, the centralized crypto exchanges can see illicit liquidity coming into their systems. And so you have the knowledge bases there. But because of corporate liability fears and draconian privacy regulations and bureaucratic territorialism, it's difficult to integrate these different information nodes to provide resolve when a crime happens. And so there's no sharing of information until a months-long process, whether it involves prosecutorial authorities coming in personally or being subpoenaed, the company is being subpoenaed. So I think what's required is a structural change that would integrate the information for the purposes of fencing off organized retail crime. And that could come in the form of a legal framework, or it could come in the form of corporations realizing that the harmonization of their internal ecosystem and that with the outside blockchain players is the best loss prevention tool.
I want to wrap up with this question. If you were advising retail leaders and policymakers, what one change would most quickly close the advantage criminals at least believe they have?
Well, imagine a scenario where a multi-state cargo theft occurs, and within minutes, the known digital signatures are flagged across every compliant crypto exchange's risk engine. Okay, so as soon as the event happens, crypto exchanges, the risk engines flag this activity with whatever nexus they have. And so when the organized retail crime attempts to liquidate their stolen goods, they are met with difficulties at any off-ramp they attempt. And I don't know if off-ramp means when the crypto is somehow turned into a tangible asset, right? Either fiat cash or any other. And so the criminals are now thriving in the shadows of bureaucracy, right? Or bureaucratic lag, let's say. And they profit off that time delay. So the policy, I think the best defense policy, especially with autonomous AI in the near or long term, is this integration. When the event happens, the industry flags any nexus they have to that event instead of waiting for months or years for a subpoena or prosecutorial collaboration.
Being able to move more swiftly would certainly be an advantage, one would think. Mahmoud, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks for sharing your insight. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Marty, for having me. I hope this was helpful and great show. And I look forward to seeing your next guest as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much. For retail leaders, the lesson seems clear. Follow the money, because in the end, organized retail crime, like most everything in the world, runs on incentives, and incentives can be disrupted. That's it for this episode of Retail's Most Wanted. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, LVT. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button or follow button so you can catch each new episode. We put one out every 2 weeks. We're also on X, LinkedIn, and YouTube, so you can follow us there. Thanks for being with us, everyone. And as always, keep up the good fight.